Alan Pace, a 24-year-old security guard at Dunbar Armored Inc., walked into the most secure vault in Los Angeles every single night. He knew the cameras, he knew the schedules, he knew every blind spot, every rotation, every guard who looked the other way. And on the night of September 12, 1997, he used all of it. You're watching 6 men in ski masks storm the largest cash vault on the West Coast. Right now, they are zip-tying guards, loading duffel bags, and walking out with $18.9 million in cash. The guards inside think this is a random armed robbery. They have no idea this was planned for months by someone who ate lunch with them every day. The man behind it wasn't a mob boss. He wasn't a cartel enforcer. He was a vault guard, a regular employee with a regular paycheck who simply memorized everything, called his childhood friends, and handed them the blueprints to the biggest cash heist in American history. For weeks, Alan Pace scouted his own workplace. He clocked shift changes. He tracked cash deliveries. He identified the one window, 45 minutes, where the vault held the most money and the fewest eyes. How does a security guard turn his own employer into a target? How do 6 men from the same neighborhood pull off a heist that the FBI called nearly perfect? And how does $18.9 million just disappear? Look at how armored car companies work. Their entire business model is trust. They hire people, put them inside the most secure facilities in the country, and bet everything on the idea that those people will never look too hard at what surrounds them. Alan Pace looked hard. He had been working at Dunbar Armored Incorporated in Los Angeles since he was a teenager. By his mid-20s, he was a vault supervisor, one of the few employees with unrestricted access to the facility on Mateo Street in downtown LA. This was not a small operation. Dunbar processed cash for banks, casinos, retailers, and federal agencies across Southern California. On any given night, the vault held tens of millions of dollars. Pace knew this. He watched the numbers move. He watched the trucks come in loaded and leave light. And at some point, nobody knows exactly when, he stopped seeing it as a job and started seeing it as an opportunity. But here is what separates Alan Pace from every other disgruntled employee who's had the same thought. He didn't act on impulse. He didn't talk to the wrong person. He didn't Google anything that could later be used against him. He simply watched and waited and planned. The facility had armed guards, surveillance cameras, and strict entry protocols. Outsiders couldn't get in. That was the whole point. But Pace wasn't an outsider. He was the insider. And the security that kept everyone else out meant nothing when the threat was already standing inside the vault every night. He started identifying the weak points, not in the physical security. The locks, the cameras, the alarms were all solid. The weakness was timing. Every Friday night into Saturday morning, Dunbar processed a surge of cash from retailers and weekend business deposits. The vault would hit peak capacity sometime around midnight, and there was a window, roughly 45 minutes, where the skeleton overnight crew was stretched thin. That was the window. Now he needed the right people. Here's the thing about high-stakes crime. It almost always comes back to loyalty, or the absence of it. Professional criminals build crews from known associates, career criminals, people with experience moving money, managing risk, keeping quiet. The logic is that professionals understand the stakes. They've done this before. They know what silence is worth. Alan Pace went a completely different direction. He called his childhood friends, Eugene Hill, Tadashi Williams, Eric Eugene Turner, Kelvin O'Neill Elliott, and Lorenzo DiStefano. 5 men from the same Los Angeles neighborhoods where Pace grew up. Most of them had no serious criminal history. None of them had ever done anything close to this scale. On paper, this looks like a catastrophic mistake, and eventually, it was. But in the short term, it was also the reason the robbery worked so cleanly. These weren't loose cannons with records that could be traced. They were ordinary men who had no profile, no priors to connect them, and a deep personal loyalty to the man who had invited them in. Pace didn't pitch this as a desperate gamble. He pitched it as a guaranteed payday. He had the access, he had the layout, he had the timing. All they needed to do was execute. He walked them through the plan in detail, the entry point, the guard positions, the exact route through the facility to the vault room, the bags they would need, the vehicles, the sequence, every variable accounted for. This was not a smash and grab. This was surgical. The date was set for September 12th, 1997, a Friday night into Saturday morning. Peak cash, minimal staff, maximum window. They had one shot, and Alan Pace had made sure every angle was covered, except for one, himself. It's just after midnight in downtown Los Angeles. The streets are quiet. The Dunbar facility on Mateo Street looks like every other industrial building on the block. Nondescript, unremarkable, deliberately forgettable. Inside, the vault is full. The overnight crew is running its normal routine, counting, processing, moving cash between cages. Standard Friday procedure. Nobody is expecting anything unusual. This is a secure facility in a commercial district. Nobody robs Dunbar. That's not how this works. At approximately 12:30 in the morning, 6 masked men move. They breach the facility through a side entrance, a point of access that Alan Pace had identified in advance. They move fast and they move quiet. Ski masks, gloves, zip ties. Within minutes, the guards on duty are on the ground, hands bound behind their backs. There is no prolonged confrontation, no shootout. The crew knows exactly where to go and exactly how long they have. They move directly to the vault room. The cash is stacked, sorted, ready. They start loading duffel bags, and they keep loading. $18.9 million. In physical bills, that is an extraordinary amount of weight and volume. We're talking about dozens of bags, hundreds of pounds of currency. Loading that kind of cash takes time, coordination, and nerve. These men had all three. Then they walked out. No shots fired, no alarms triggered, no pursuit. They loaded the vehicles and disappeared into Los Angeles like smoke. The guards, still zip-tied on the floor of the facility, would be found hours later when the morning shift arrived. By then, the crew was gone, and $18.9 million in untraceable cash had simply ceased to exist. It was the largest cash robbery in United States history, and for a moment, a brief, extraordinary moment, it looked like they might actually get away with it. When the FBI arrived at the Dunbar facility on the morning of September 13th, 1997, they were looking at something they had never quite seen before. The crime scene was almost too clean. No forced entry at the primary access points. No sign of a struggle beyond the zip-tied guards. No shell casings, no prints. The cameras had captured very little of operational value. The crew had known exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. That knowledge, precise, operational, insider-level knowledge, was the first thing that stood out. You don't avoid cameras in an armored facility by luck. You avoid them because someone told you where they were. The FBI immediately focused the investigation on the possibility of an inside man, a current or former employee who had either directly participated or provided detailed intelligence to the crew. They began working through the Dunbar employee roster, background checks, financial records, known associates, anyone with access to the vault and the layout of the facility. Alan Pace's name came up early. He had the access, he had the seniority, he had the knowledge of the layout, the cameras, the shift patterns. On paper, he was exactly the profile they were looking for, but at first they couldn't prove anything. Pace was cooperative in interviews. He expressed shock, appropriate concern, all the right things. There was no physical evidence tying him to the scene. No witnesses, no money trail, at least not yet. Here is where most criminals in history have gotten away with things. The absence of direct evidence creates a window. If you keep quiet, keep the money hidden, and give the investigation nothing to work with, you might survive it. Pace's crew did not keep quiet. This is the part of the story that repeats itself across almost every major heist in history. It is not the FBI that breaks these cases open. It's the criminals themselves. The Dunbar crew had $18.9 million, and almost immediately they started spending it. Not in ways that were subtle or considered, in ways that were loud, visible, and completely inconsistent with their known incomes. One crew member purchased a house, cash. Another bought a fleet of cars. A third started a business, funded with physical currency in a way that made no accounting sense. Friends started noticing. Family members started noticing. Neighbors started noticing. In the world of financial crime, this is called lifestyle inflation, and it is almost always fatal to the criminal enterprise. The FBI began picking up on it within months. Tips came in, informants surfaced. People who knew the crew members started talking, either voluntarily or because investigators applied pressure. By early 1998, the investigation had a new direction. It was no longer just about who had access to the Dunbar facility. It was about who, in Alan Pace's circle, had suddenly come into unexplained money. The threads started connecting, and then investigators got something tangible, physical evidence. Cash recovered from one of the crew members' properties that could be traced back, by serial numbers and sequence, to the Dunbar vault. That was it. That was the thread they needed. Arrests began in 1999, roughly 2 years after the robbery. Alan Pace was among the first taken into custody. Then, one by one, the rest of the crew. The case that had looked unsolvable started falling apart quickly once the first domino went down. Plea deals were offered. Some were taken. Testimony was exchanged. $18.9 million stolen. And despite 2 years of hiding it, most of the money was never fully recovered. Investigators believe much of it had been spent, buried, or moved in ways that made it impossible to trace. Alan Pace went to trial in 2000. The prosecution's case was built around 3 pillars: his access to the facility and the insider knowledge demonstrated by the crew's movements, the financial evidence linking crew members to the stolen cash, and the testimony of co-conspirators who had taken plea deals in exchange for cooperation. Pace's defense argued that the government's case was circumstantial, that access alone did not prove participation, that the testimony of co-conspirators was inherently unreliable, motivated by self-interest and reduced sentences rather than truth. It was a reasonable defense, and in another case with less corroborating evidence, it might have worked. It didn't work here. The jury convicted Alan Pace on multiple counts of robbery and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. The other crew members received varying sentences depending on their level of cooperation and participation. Some received lighter terms in exchange for their testimony. Others served significant time. The judge at sentencing noted the planning, the precision, and the deliberate exploitation of a position of trust. This was not a crime of opportunity or desperation. This was a calculated betrayal of an employer, of colleagues, and of the legal system, executed with patience and intelligence in service of pure greed. Here is what the FBI never fully resolved. Of the $18.9 million stolen from the Dunbar vault, investigators believe they recovered somewhere between $4 and $6 million. The rest, more than $12 million, simply vanished. Where does $12 million go? Some of it was almost certainly spent on houses, cars, businesses, and the visible lifestyle inflation that helped crack the case open in the first place. Some of it may have been buried or stored in ways that were never discovered. Some of it may have moved through informal financial networks, loans to family members, investments in cash-heavy businesses, transfers that left no clean paper trail. The honest answer is, nobody knows for certain. What investigators do know is that the money was distributed among the crew almost immediately after the robbery. Pace did not hold it centrally. Each man took his share and was responsible for managing it. That decentralization made full recovery nearly impossible, because by the time arrests were made, the money had been dispersed across too many hands, too many locations, and too many transactions to trace completely. It is not impossible that somewhere in Los Angeles today, a portion of the Dunbar money still exists, in the walls of a house, in a storage unit, in an account that was never flagged. Financial investigators have found cold cash from old crimes decades after the fact. It happens, but most of it is probably gone, spent on lives that were briefly extraordinary and then ended behind federal prison walls. Step back and look at what Alan Pace actually built. He was 24 years old. He had a legitimate job with access that most people never get. And instead of recognizing that access as a career, as something that could build something real and lasting, he used it as a one-time extraction tool. This is the pattern that runs through almost every insider crime at this scale. The perpetrator has something genuinely valuable, access, knowledge, trust, and they convert it into a single transaction instead of a compounding asset. Pace could have spent decades in armored security. He had the discipline and the intelligence. The Dunbar heist proved that. He planned meticulously. He identified vulnerabilities. He understood systems at a structural level. Those are real skills, valuable skills, skills that organizations pay well for. Instead, he organized one night, one window, one vault, and traded everything, his freedom, his future, his relationships, for a fraction of the money that was ultimately spent, seized, or lost. The crew members who followed him made the same trade. They trusted someone who had a plan. The plan worked, and it still destroyed them. There is also something in this case about the nature of loyalty. Pace chose his crew based on personal history. These were people he trusted because he had known them since childhood. And in the short term, that trust held. Nobody talked immediately. Nobody went to law enforcement. But when the money started flowing and investigators started circling, the loyalty began to fracture. Not because these were bad people, though they had done a bad thing, but because the human impulse to protect yourself, to reduce your sentence, to get a deal, is stronger than almost any other bond when federal prison time is on the table. Pace's network held together for the crime. It fell apart under the prosecution. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe for the next one.